66 million years ago, an asteroid ended the reign of the dinosaurs in an instant. The Chicxulub impact was one of the most devastating events in Earth's history. A single object from space wiped out 75% of all life on the planet. That wasn't science fiction. That was real. And it wasn't the last time we've been threatened. Today, NASA and ESA maintain near-constant monitoring of the skies, tracking thousands of near-Earth objects. But despite advanced technology, even modern systems fail to spot every threat in time. In 2023, a small asteroid labeled 2023 BU slipped past detection and came just 3,500 kilometers from Earth, closer than most satellites. It arrived without warning. In this regard, an unpleasant question arises. What if next time another cosmic body does not miss? Meet Apophis, a real asteroid roughly 370 meters wide. Its next close approach is scheduled for 2029, when it will pass within 31,000 kilometers of Earth, skimming closer than our geostationary satellites. Astronomers currently predict that it will miss us. But orbital trajectories are never absolute. A shift in gravitational influence, a miscalculation in timing, or a nudge from another cosmic object, and everything could change. So what happens if it doesn't miss? What if Apophis collides with Earth? This is not a doomsday fantasy. It's a scientifically plausible scenario. In this video, we'll simulate one of the most terrifying yet realistic versions of impact to show how quickly everything can fall apart when space decides to strike. On April 13, 2029, people all over the world look up at the sky. Some see a fast-moving star, others know its name, Apophis. It appears brighter than most stars, moving steadily across the sky as if it were part of some cosmic ballet. But this is no ordinary celestial object. Apophis, a 370-meter asteroid, is making the closest flyby of its kind in recorded history, just 31,000 kilometers from Earth. That's lower than the orbit of many communication satellites. For most, it's a moment of wonder. For others, it feels like a warning. Astronomers had been watching this asteroid for years. Originally, some believed there was a chance of impact in 2029. Later calculations ruled that out. But they didn't rule out something more subtle and far more dangerous, the gravitational keyhole. This invisible window in space, just a few hundred meters wide, is where Earth's gravity could slightly alter Apophis's path. If it passes through this keyhole, it won't hit Earth in 2029. But it will on its next return. Most scientists are calm. The numbers still suggest safety. But on the night of the flyby, deep space tracking stations detect a change. It's tiny, just 0.0007 degrees off from the predicted path. Too small to trigger public panic. Too small even to make the news cycle last more than a day. But to those running simulations, that number means everything. A fractional shift at that distance can mean thousands of kilometers of difference in a few years. The 2036 flyby is reevaluated. Some teams find that the new trajectory, while still uncertain, brings the risk of impact back into the conversation. NASA releases a statement. We are aware of the updated tracking data and are continuing our observations. At this time, the likelihood of any future impact remains extremely low. The media, hungry for assurance, echoes the message. Late-night hosts crack jokes, memes spread. The moment fades. But not for everyone. In some corners of the world, the flyby is taken more seriously. A group of private engineers in Switzerland begins designing deep Earth shelters. Wealthy clients in Dubai and New Zealand inquire about land in high-altitude regions. In Russia, a closed-door meeting leads to classified satellite projects being accelerated. Governments don't talk, but they're watching. Military radar installations in the US, China, and France quietly assign new tracking priorities. In the scientific community, debates ignite behind the scenes. Should they raise the alarm or wait for more data? Publicly calm, privately tension. Meanwhile, Apophis slips into the darkness again, silent, ancient, indifferent. It won't be back for years. But the Earth's rotation, gravitational pull, and the sun's radiation all play their roles now. The future of its path is no longer fully predictable. With each passing month, confidence in the original projections begins to erode bit by bit, but the public hears nothing more. Life returns to normal. For now. By the early 2030s, Apophis has once again faded from the headlines. But in deep space tracking stations and simulation labs across the world, it never truly left. New calculations emerge in 2030 suggesting something troubling. The 2029 flyby may have slightly altered Apophis's long-term trajectory. A future close encounter in 2068 is flagged. The probability of impact is calculated to be just 0.004%, a statistical whisper. But some advanced orbital models begin suggesting a disturbing trend. Apophis's orbit is more chaotic than expected, and it's drifting unpredictably. Most media outlets ignore it, but among mission planners at ESA and NASA, a new proposal gains momentum. In 2031, a joint mission is launched. An autonomous drone satellite named CIRS is sent on a slow pursuit of Apophis. Its goal is simple: get close, scan the surface, and determine how this asteroid might behave under gravitational stress. In 2033, CIRS reaches Apophis. The images it sends back are chilling. Apophis isn't solid rock. It's what scientists feared it might be: a rubble pile asteroid, essentially a loose collection of debris held together by weak gravity. CIRS observes fine cracks running across its surface. Tiny fragments are already flaking off, trailing behind like dust in sunlight. One side of the asteroid appears to be fragmenting at a faster rate, possibly due to earlier solar heating. As CIRS completes its scans, a second shock emerges. The asteroid's spin rate has subtly increased since 2029, possibly due to the Yorp effect, solar radiation slowly twisting its momentum. These findings change everything. Revised models are run. For weeks, teams feed the new data into climate, ocean, and kinetic impact simulations. What they find is worse than anyone anticipated. If Apophis enters Earth's atmosphere in the wrong orientation, its loose structure could collapse mid-entry. This wouldn't lessen the threat, it would spread it. A direct impact by a solid asteroid might cause regional damage, but a high-velocity fragmenting impact could generate a wide-area atmospheric explosion, followed by ocean entry, triggering tsunamis and global atmospheric disruption. The worst-case scenario? A multi-kilometer tsunami from an impact in the Pacific Ocean. Not extinction level, but civilization ending. In late 2034, a leaked white paper from a European think tank finds its way onto Reddit. It outlines the updated models, and within days, panic spreads across the internet. YouTube explodes with analysis videos. Reddit hosts survival threads. On X, formerly Twitter, a movement begins. Deep Impact 2036. Some users claim NASA is hiding the truth. Others compare this to previous near misses, calling it fear-mongering. But quietly, in the background, something real shifts. In the US, a defense initiative known only to classified circles as Project Ares is reactivated. Originally created as a multi-threat mitigation protocol, it includes contingency planning for asteroid deflection, nuclear intervention, and some say extraterrestrial contact. The Department of Defense denies its existence. But military contractors start shifting budgets. Defense satellites launch under vague pretexts. Japan, India, and Russia quietly follow suit with their own programs. China begins constructing deep Earth shelters beneath Tibet. Meanwhile, the public remains uninformed. Official channels downplay any serious threat, pointing to the extremely low impact probability. But the scientists involved are no longer calm. The models show it clearly. If Apophis deviates by just 12 more kilometers in the wrong direction over the next few years, it will intersect Earth's orbit, not in 2068, but on a return path that brings it dangerously close in 2036. The clock is ticking. The asteroid is changing. And this time, it's not just about where it hits, it's about how much of it survives the fall. April 13th, 2068. For most of the world, it begins like any other day. But astronomers, defense analysts, and heads of state are holding their breath. Apophis, the asteroid once considered a harmless near miss, is now closing in. Its approach is no longer theoretical. Calculations are no longer probabilistic. This is the moment of impact. Traveling at nearly 25 kilometers per second, Apophis enters Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. It appears first as a blinding white streak in the sky, brighter than the sun. Within seconds, the air begins to crack and tremble. The asteroid compresses the atmosphere before it even touches water. The shockwave breaks windows in California and Chile before the asteroid hits. And then, silence. The impact occurs in the Central Pacific, between Hawaii and the western coast of South America. The detonation is not nuclear, but it might as well be. Estimated energy release, 1,200 megatons. That's the equivalent of 80,000 Hiroshima bombs, unleashed in a single moment. A white flash, a deep rumble that circles the planet, and a wall of water rising from the ocean floor. The tsunami is unimaginable. An initial vertical water column 5 kilometers high collapses into a wave system traveling in all directions at hundreds of kilometers per hour. Coastal detection systems, overwhelmed or destroyed, send scattered alerts. But it's too late. Within 3 hours, walls of water 200 to 300 meters high slam into Pacific coastlines. Hawaii disappears entirely. The western seaboard of the United States, from San Diego to Seattle, is leveled. Japan vanishes underwater and debris. Australia's eastern coast becomes a graveyard of cities. Indonesia, already fragmented, is torn apart. The entire Pacific basin is shredded. Tens of millions die in the first 24 hours. Hundreds of millions are displaced. Entire nations cease to function. But the water is only the beginning. The atmospheric impact generates an immense vapor plume. Tons of ocean water, pulverized rock, and superheated steam rise into the upper atmosphere. Ash and aerosol particles are carried into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight within days. Satellite systems, already compromised during entry by electromagnetic pulses, begin to fail entirely. Many satellites were already shut down as precaution. Others are destroyed by orbit disruption and atmospheric heating. Global communication collapses. The internet is fragmented. With undersea cables severed and most ground stations flooded or destroyed, entire continents go dark. Radio becomes the only surviving network, and even that, patchy and disorganized. In the weeks that follow, Earth's climate begins to shift. The vapor released into the stratosphere traps outgoing heat but blocks incoming sunlight. A brief thermal spike is followed by rapid cooling. Temperatures fall 3 to 5 degrees Celsius globally. Crops in the northern hemisphere begin to fail by mid-year. Acid rain, from sulfur-rich particles and atmospheric reactions, begins to fall in parts of Asia, South America, and the Pacific Islands. Rivers are poisoned. Infrastructure, already weakened, begins to decay. Air travel halts. Oil refineries in coastal areas are submerged. Supply chains disintegrate. Nations enter survival mode or collapse entirely. And yet, no continent is spared. Though the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and inland zones escape the wave, they do not escape the consequences. Mass migration begins from the Pacific Rim. Resources dwindle. Famine looms. Governments fracture under the pressure. Martial law is declared in dozens of countries. In places like the Andes, the Himalayas, and the Rockies, survivors form enclaves, not of resistance, but of preservation. There is no quick rebound. This is not the end of civilization, but it is the end of the world as it was. Apophis came, not as a myth or divine punishment, but as a cosmic reminder. The universe doesn't ask permission. And next we will see how humanity attempts to rise from what's left. The impact was only the beginning. What followed in the 2 years after Apophis struck the Pacific was a planetary reckoning. Coastal regions across the Americas, Asia, and Oceania were gone, erased within hours. But it was the slow, grinding collapse that came afterward that rewrote civilization itself. By mid-2068, famine spread faster than any government could respond. With most of the global shipping infrastructure obliterated and food-producing regions submerged or destabilized, grain reserves dwindled in weeks. The U.S. Midwest, once the breadbasket of the world, had become a zone of climate chaos, torrential storms, flash freezes, and erratic droughts. China's coastal farmland was lost. Rice from Southeast Asia stopped flowing. Sub-Saharan Africa, surprisingly insulated from the initial shock, became both a haven and a battleground. Disease followed hunger. The sudden displacement of over 2 billion people across the Pacific Rim created dense, unsanitary refugee zones in places like Central Asia, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. Old pathogens reemerged: cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis, but it was the new ones, triggered by environmental stress and population collapse, that stunned scientists. A mutation of avian flu originating in Central Asia swept through camps in early 2069. Antibiotics were scarce, vaccines even more so. By 2070, the global population had fallen below 1 billion. But the collapse was uneven. Some regions, though battered, maintained relative order. Northern Europe, shielded from the oceanic destruction, experienced extreme weather and food shortages but preserved its infrastructure. Scandinavian countries shifted to emergency communal farming models. Poland, Germany, and inland France absorbed millions of refugees at a high cost. Farther east, Russia's interior, long neglected, became a bastion of relative stability, though it too faced internal conflict and authoritarian consolidation. In contrast, the United States had ceased to function as a single country. The federal government dissolved into regional administrations by 2069. The West Coast was underwater. The Northeast had been battered by storms and waves. Only parts of the interior, Colorado, Utah, Montana, retained functional civil structures, largely through local military and technocratic leadership. Canada absorbed some of this strain, but faced its own humanitarian crisis along the southern border. China's coastal megacities, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, were gone. The Communist Party attempted to reconstitute power inland, but faced revolt from military factions in rural provinces. What emerged were fractured enclaves, some technological, others agrarian, many authoritarian. The concept of a unified China faded within 2 years. Meanwhile, Africa became a paradox. Initially, the continent seemed spared. Few major coastal cities, resilient agrarian systems, and relatively low dependency on global imports. But as millions flooded toward the continent, from Europe, from the Middle East, from drowned islands, chaos erupted. The Sahel saw mass migrations northward. South Africa became a fortified stronghold. But amid the chaos, new coalitions emerged. Technocratic city-states formed around former UN hubs like Nairobi and Addis Ababa. Solar-powered infrastructure and preserved pre-crisis satellite networks gave these enclaves a fragile but functional edge. The Middle East fractured along familiar fault lines, worsened by mass water scarcity and the end of oil exports. Desalination plants along the Persian Gulf were lost to the tsunami. The Gulf states collapsed into tribal conflict. Iran and Turkey built internal bastions of power focused solely on survival, not expansion. By 2070, the global map no longer made sense. There were no nations in the traditional sense, only enclaves, red zones, and silence. Communication was limited to old radio frequencies, scattered intranet systems, and sporadic low-orbit drone relays. The idea of the global economy had died with the undersea cables and cloud data centers. What rose in its place was something stranger. Small, hyper-adaptive communities ruled not by ideology, but by necessity. Some were led by engineers and scientists, others by former military commanders or survivalist cults. None spoke of rebuilding the old world. They spoke only of enduring the new one. Earth had not been destroyed, but humanity, as it was, had been reset. The Anthropocene had ended, not with a bang, but with a long, choking silence followed by a whisper of reinvention. The impact took seconds. The consequences will echo for millennia. In the blink of an eye, Earth lost everything that once defined global civilization. Communication networks, electricity, trade routes, governance. There were no warning sirens, no heroic speeches, no final countdown. Just silence. And then collapse. Cities vanished. Governments ceased. The infrastructure that had taken centuries to build crumbled in weeks. Without satellites, the skies went dark. Without internet, knowledge became localized again, fragmented, fading. Humanity wasn't wiped out instantly, but the world it had built was. No one imagined the end would come like this, not through war, nor plague, but through orbit and gravity. There was no time to process, to organize, to hope. Survival became less about strength or intelligence, and more about location and luck. Those who lived had no time to grieve. They dug, they fled, they hid. And when the ash settled, they emerged into a planet that no longer looked like home. The air was heavy with dust, the oceans were poisoned with debris, sunlight barely pierced the veil above. Crops failed, radiation lingered. For many, the only legacy left was memory, and even that began to fade. The landscape now looks more like Mars than Earth. Dry, cracked soil, endless gray twilight, strange winds where forests used to breathe. The blue planet, once vibrant with noise and movement, is quiet now, a shadow of its former self. Civilization wasn't defeated, it simply stopped. Not with a decision, but with inevitability. And in the end, those who survived were not the chosen, not the prepared, just the ones who happened to be out of the way. No gods, no judgment, no reset button. Only a question remains. If this is how the world ends, not tomorrow, not in theory, but suddenly and for real, what would you do on your final day? Dear friends, If you like this video, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the new releases. Thanks for watching.